Hey there, it's Martin here from Man of York. I'm just sat in today, enjoying a cup of tea and doing a little bit of reading. I hope you guys have got a beverage or a pipe or something, whether it be a cup of tea, a coffee, or a good Cavendish or Virginia tobacco that you're smoking in your pipes. I thought today we could just have a little chat about my reading list. And so I don't know whether anyone else does this, but I always set out a good list of books that I'm going to read throughout the year. And 2019 was really poor for me for reading. I only read 7 books that I wanted to actually read. Other ones I kind of read just out of research for work and things, because as you know I work in the heritage industry, so I do a lot of reading kind of just around for work really. And so I don't really count those. But I do have a list of books, and I think I had 12 last year, and this year I'm seriously going to read 12. And I've got them all laid out here ready to show you. And so I had to catch up, so at the start of January I started reading some books that I was halfway through, one of which was this mighty tome here, which has been very enjoyable to read, is The Sagas of the Icelanders, which is of course a collection of the old medieval literature of Iceland. And this book itself is just really beautiful because it's got these really chopped pages. It's really kind of just good to feel, but also it's got a fantastic bit at the end where it's got a historical glossary of different aspects of Viking or early medieval life or what have you. But some of the stories are gigantic sagas that kind of span generations of different characters, and others are kind of heroic legends of outlaws. Like, for example, Thorstein Staffstruck and this tale of sarcastic Halli and other such characters. And some of them are really mad and out there, but also really interesting because they tell us so much about medieval society in the 13th century or even maybe the 10th century. Most of them were kind of written around the 13th century, but they're based in what they call the heroic age, which is the time of the Viking settlement of Iceland. But there's some really good stories, and I'd recommend actually dipping into the Icelandic sagas. They're filled with this aura of mystery and magic from a time when kind of pagans are starting to embrace Christian values, but they're still kind of hanging on to those honour systems. And the stories really, the main theme is kind of justice, and there's lots of problems with bad neighbours and outlaws and people causing problems with society. And the honour system that they had in those days, and that violence should follow a wrongdoing or a slight and stuff, and then the new laws that are coming in to counter that. So it's a very interesting read, and I'd recommend it if you're interested in justice or settlement of new places or just medieval literature in general and legends. So they're really cool. So I finally finished that, and it's taken me 2 years to read that. I've also finished reading King John, and so I've been trying to read biographies of different English kings, and I read an Edward III one by Ian Mortimer, and this one's by Mark Morris. So some of you may be familiar with Mark Morris if you like your history books, popular history books. I didn't start at the start, so I maybe should have started with William the Conqueror if I was going to read about medieval kings. But I started in the wrong place. I started with Edward III, and I've kind of been going backwards, so I might, in a few months when I get round to it, start reading my William the Conqueror book, which I haven't put on my seat. I don't know where I put that. Bear with me. There we are. Just a textbook that I actually stole from school from years and years ago. And yeah, but just a Yale book on William the Conqueror. So I'm going to read that. I know quite a bit about William the Conqueror, but I just want more detail. It's good practice to know your kings very well, especially when you work kind of in educating kids about history and stuff. Another one by, once I've done William the Conqueror, I'll have to get onto Edward I at some point. I visited a few of his castles in Wales, and so I want to know more about Edward I. And of course Edward II as well. And he's actually one of the most interesting kings, actually, Edward II, believe it or not, just because of the amount of stuff that went on in his reign. A real tumultuous time for England, particularly in the north. And currently reading, at the moment, Night Terrors by E.F. Benson. And this is a collection of short ghost stories, and as you know, I like my Edwardian and Victorian literature. And if you like ghost stories, I know that Mark from Northeast Piper, I know he really likes his kind of Victorian ghost stories and Victorian science fiction and stuff. And I would recommend E.F. Benson. He's got a very similar vibe to M.R. James, who's one of the most famous ghost story writers, that venerable Dean of Eton College. But unlike M.R. James, he sets all his ghost stories not in kind of the shadowy world of old colleges and universities and old dark houses with moody weather and things, but he always sets them in kind of bright, sunny Edwardian halcyon days, basically, with people golfing and playing bridge and doing what kind of the Edwardian middle class will get up to, really, having seances and stuff. And it's a different, fresh take on your kind of ghost story, and I find it quite interesting. His ghosts are really malicious as well, so he knows how to write a good one, because you always need to have really mean, nasty ghosts, and they're really quite creepy as well. And and some of them quite strange, yeah. So yeah, perfect for winter evenings is reading E.F. Benson's ghost stories. He was quite an interesting character. His brother wrote Words for Land of Hope and Glory. He had a very talented family. And he was also an archaeologist as well, and went into the Middle East to do excavations and things. So you'll get a few Egyptian-based stories in there as well. Another book I'm reading, which is a bit of a departure from me. I don't normally read books about the Second World War, but this. So this is Darkness Over Germany, and this was recommended to me by a friend. It's published by Cumberland Lodge, which is a house in the Great Park, and it's all about essentially the rise of Nazi Germany. And Amy Buller, or Ernestine Amy Buller rather, was a British woman who went into Germany just after the Treaty of Versailles, and then in 1935 to kind of like work out the German mindset at that time. And she interviewed lots of middle class and also soldier officer class kind of people living at that time, and worked out what their opinions of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were. And it's really interesting because she was an Anglo-Catholic. I think she was originally a Baptist, but she eventually became a Catholic. And her kind of slant is that the rise of Nazism was brought about due to a lack of spirituality in Germany at the time, and because of the oppression of the Treaty of Versailles and the depression, of course, as well, and the inflation things, unemployment, that people kind of lost themselves and clung to whatever kind of hero worship they could find in the Nazi Party and nationalism. But she all links it back to the fact that it was a crisis of faith originally, and people were replacing religion with Nazi fascism, really. But yeah, it's really fascinating, and if you're into the Second World War and the roots of it, and particularly the roots of evil and in society as well, this is like really fascinating read. I'd recommend it. So those are what I'm reading at the moment, and here's the list that's going to go on. I actually started this one. I started Ralph Waldo Emerson's philosophies and writings on nature, and this is something I was actually introduced to from watching Joshua Wood's videos, because he often quoted Waldo Emerson, so I know he's a very popular philosopher and writer in the United States, Quaker. And I wanted to read this because one thing that you probably don't know about me is I'm quite a deeply spiritual Christian myself, and I also, of course, have a very strong attachment to nature, and so I wanted to read something which was in a Christian slant, talking about nature really, and about God and nature and how you can find God in nature, which is essentially what Waldo Emerson's essays are all about. But yeah, that'll be a more uplifting read, I think, from the other one, the Nazi book. So yeah, that would be quite interesting, that one. Also, which I've had on my shelf for ages now, which I really want to read, is this big, lovely book, Le Morte d'Arthur. And so you know how I read Mabinogion, which is the Welsh legends earlier on last year in 2019, and I want to read the 15th century slant of the Arthurian legends. So, and this book was given to me by a close friend of mine. It's got really amazing, fun fantasy illustrations in it, which is quite cool. And it's literally, if you don't know Morte Arthur, it was written by Mallory, who was a man of court in the Middle Ages, in the late 15th century, so around sort of Richard III and Henry VII's reign. And some people go on to think that he might have been influenced by the kind of the chivalric nature of Edward IV and Richard III's reigns, and so he was trying to liken Arthur to them. But that's debatable, of course. So yeah, look, you've got all kinds of things going on. Morgan Le Fay and the dragons and other creatures. So that'll be good to read. That's a good winter read, but I don't think I'll get round to it by winter. I think I'll end up reading it in spring probably. I need to read a biography. I read a biography every single year, and I chose to read J.R. Tolkien's biography this year, and I've had this for a while as well. I was meaning to read it last year, and so I'm hoping that that'll be my February read. So the next thing I start, maybe after Emerson perhaps. So I know that was pipe smokers were all into J.R. Tolkien. There he is, constantly smoking his pipe. Some non-fiction as well. This was kind of fobbed off on me and forced upon me, and someone from work gave me that, so I accepted it. It's a kind of a non-fiction about the Middle Ages, and also about magic and folklore, which is also something I'm interested in. I'm not hugely excited about it, so it might be on the bottom of my list, we'll see. We've got other non-fiction as well to read. The next Uhtred book, so some of you might watch The Last Kingdom, or are familiar with Bernard Cornwell, the author of Sharp. Just good military fiction, all about Vikings and Anglo-Saxons. Uhtred of Bebbanburg, basically raging his way across the south of England. But this one should be quite interesting because it's set around my area this time, so set around kind of the south of England. So it should be quite nice to read now that I'm down here. I also need to read the next Simon Scarrow book as well. So these are my kind of guilty pleasures of reading these ones, the military fiction ones. So always filled with good blood and guts and lots of action. As a Praetorian is about Macro and Cato, two centurions in the Roman army, and they're fighting. They basically fight across most of the conflicts of the tumultuous period after the Britain Claudian invasions. And another Gothic one as well, which might be interested in, is Anne Radcliffe's The Italian. So this is where it all starts as Gothic literature apparently, and so this is one of those horror stories with dungeons and evil nuns and other Gothic things to titillate Victorian women, and so I'm going to read that and see where all this Gothic fanaticism started, especially after reading Wagner the Werewolf last Christmas. That was a real roller coaster. And and then I missed out as well, of course, the one I'm reading at once I finish William the Conqueror book, I'll probably read this one actually. So I've left this one out, haven't I? Because I don't have a book on Henry III. I might take one out of the library maybe. But this is more of a military history of the Barons' conflict, so Lewes and Evesham, with Simon de Montfort rising up against Henry III to support Magna Carta. So that should be interesting. Yeah. And then, of course, I'll have to get my little notebook out now because I've got books that I don't have that are on my list. Recommended by Phil, so Uncle Phil of Uncle Phil fame, got Churchill Life by Martin Gilbert, and so I'm going to read that. So thanks for the recommendation, Phil. I'm looking forward to reading that one. And I'm going to read try to read Thomas Hardy's Far From a Madding Crowd. Oh, the Dickens one, Dombey and Son. I might not get round to that. I think maybe Far From a Madding Crowd might be my December read this year. And then I've got Fall of Gondolin by J.R. Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien. May Christopher Tolkien rest in peace now. He only died like a couple of weeks ago. And then I've got My Man Jeeves on the list as well, because I'm reading another Edwardian thing, but slightly different. I always read ghost stories, so I thought I might try to read some comedies for a change and see what I think, and see if I actually like them. But yeah, so there's my book list. I've also got some footage from some churches I visited as well. I hope you'll find them interesting. They're up in the north of England in Cumbria, which I visited in December. And so they're just stock footage, but I didn't know where to put them in any of my videos, so I thought I might put them in here and see if you find them interesting. They're two medieval churches. One of them was one of those fortified churches in England, because it was fortified to prevent the Scots coming down, and supposedly the vault underneath it, which I'll show you, is where prisoners were kept from the borders, so border reivers. And also there's another church up in Cumbria where it's got one of the only wooden effigies I've ever seen. So an effigy, of course, is a knight, kind of a statue of a knight on the top of a tomb, if you don't know. And this one is wooden and is absolutely minutely and beautifully carved with the actual mail on his coif and everything. So absolutely beautiful. So yeah, I'm a bit of a medieval nut. I always root these things out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and hope everyone's okay. And I'll have another hiking or pipe video coming up soon. So, bye then.
After Bannockburn in 1315, the north of England was ravaged by the Scots, and so many churches decided to build up large fortified towers. St Cuthbert's Church in Great Salkeld, Cumbria, is one such example, which sports a gigantic medieval peel tower built in the 1380s to protect its residents against the Scots. The beautiful Anglo-Norman knotwork depicting dragons and other beasts attests to the great antiquity of the church. It was built primarily in the Norman period, but was first recorded in 880 as a stop-off point for St Cuthbert's relics on the way to Lindisfarne. If you wind your way down the gloomy spiral staircase, you'll come across a vaulted basement. It's thought that this was used as a dungeon for captured border reivers who had been taken on raids. It also would have been a good supply point during campaign, and also would have been a good feature against burning if anyone tried to fire the church in a border raid. On the masonry are carved mason's marks, pentagrams. It is actually believed that these pentagrams were used as apotropaic charms against witchcraft or evil, a testament to the superstitions of the Middle Ages. Incorporated into the later 1380s stone tower are older 1200s grave slabs which have been reused in the rebuilding. These are called cross slabs and would normally have symbols to denote the career of the individual. A sword would normally depict a male burial, shears a female, and a chalice a priest. We then went to the 12th century church of St Luke's in Ousby. Ousby comes from the Old Norse word meaning Ulf's place or Ulf's farm. I found this quite interesting because my Viking name in the Yorke Viking Centre was Ulf, so I kind of felt like this was my place. The most unique thing I saw on the trip was this amazing medieval effigy. It's carved out of wood, it's out of a single block. This is really uncommon because normally you'll find these ornamental tomb covers of knights or bishops carved in alabaster or stone, normally limestone, but wood is really uncommon. In fact, it was found in a peat bog, preserved, and may have been thrown there after being sawed, as there are saw marks on it, by puritanical iconoclastic Cromwellian troopers who probably occupied the church, and then it's been refound again. We don't know the name of this solitary knight who was found in a peat bog, but some historians have thought that perhaps Patrick de Ousbury, Adam Armstrong of the Armstrong clan, or Julian Falcard. But whatever his name, it is an amazing thing to find in a little church like this, and so unique and beautiful.